Hey there, friends. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be studying the swing of the great Fred Couples. I think he's one of the most beloved players of all time. Certainly has one of my favorite swings of all time. What we're not going to appreciate is his tempo in this video. We're going to study his positions, but maybe the best tempo of all time as well in a swing. So you could certainly argue that. All right, now, what are we looking at here? We got some lines going, right? So on the left in the red, we have plane lines, one up the club shaft, one from the ball kind of through his shoulders. And then we have a trail side line off his hips or glutes, and we have a circle around his head. The plane lines are going to help us appreciate how he's swinging steeper or shallower, which can inform us on whether that path might be moving more inside out, outside in, things like that. And the trail side line and the head circle will help us appreciate how he's either maintaining his spine angle or maybe he's standing up or dropping in, things like that. So we'll appreciate posture, if it's moving dynamically at all, things like that. On the right, we have a green ball line, and then we got some pink or purple lines there. We got an angled one off his right leg, a straight one off his left ankle, and sort of a ceiling above his head, again, whether to see whether he's moving up or down or not. All right, cool. Now we're going to go position by position. I'm sort of a position 1 through position 10 guy, sort of that Morad Mako Grady system there. But I know there's other systems where you can break it down. I think it's less steps. I haven't heard any that had more than 10 positions. But either way, as long as you are figuring out a way to kind of chunk things up and study the cause and effect of your swing, I don't think you can go wrong there, any system. All right, cool. So at setup, I think Freddie's pretty textbook, right? We can probably see he's got a little bit of a stronger grip orientation there, left hand on top, right hand underneath. He's also fairly upright with his spine angle, right? Cool. I think that's all I would note from Freddie's setup. Get rid of that spine angle line there. Ooh, I got rid of his body lines. My apologies. Let's toss those suckers back in there. All right, so we got a 90-degree angle off his lead side, and we have an angled one off his right side. Beautiful. We are off and running. Now, let's move Freddie into the takeaway. From a down the line view, the first thing we're going to notice, he stands it up a little bit, right? Not common to see these days. His arms are lifting up away from his body, and that club head is climbing over the shoulder plane. End of takeaway, position 2 is sort of shaft parallel to the ground. We'll call it right there. So again, what can we see here? We can see that the club head is outside the hands. We can see that the leading edge is roughly parallel to his spine angle, so that's a fairly square position. The biggest thing to note is that it's going up and outside the plane a little bit there, for sure. From a face-on view, we can see that this video starts just into his takeaway a little bit, but I think we can see there's like a tiny amount of space there between his right leg and that line, and I think we're going to see him close in on that space a little bit, certainly getting started there in the takeaway. Keeps that nice wide arm structure. We can see a slight fold to the trail elbow to this point. So he's shifting and he's turning a little bit, and the arm structure is just starting to get set. There's P2. All right, cool. And then no shift in posture at all, right? Kept his level, same spine angle, all that good stuff. On to position 3, left arm parallel in the backswing. Freddie is continuing to stand it up, and I would say to position 3 here, if we were to compare him to some other tour players, not much depth is what I'd say right there, right? So normally, I think by P3, a lot of great players, that handle is almost over the right bicep at that point, right? So Freddie really stands it up and keeps it more on the outside. We can see his shaft very much mirrors the plane lines. So he's setting the club. Actually, let me just do that again. And what we'll do is we'll kind of get a feel for that pitch of his shaft. So he's almost perfectly on plane, points right at the ball, right? And again, he's continued to pressure into his trail side, but he's coiling, right? When I say coiling, that right hip is starting to work. Ooh, I'm going to do an arrow here. That right hip is starting to work back around that way a little bit, right? So it's not just a pure sway away from the target where he'd move past that line. Okay, cool. And there's P3 again. The biggest takeaway is from a face-on view, I think he's much more textbook. From a down-the-line view on the left, a big thing about Freddie's swing is he stands that club up and outside a little bit in the takeaway and backswing. So that's P3. On to P4, top of backswing. Okay, cool. We'll call that right about, he's getting ready to change direction there. Right about there. Now, what I'm going to note is we can see a little bit of that club head right there, right? So then I wouldn't call this necessarily top of backswing yet. Right about there is top of backswing, right? And we can see the club in this position. You could almost call it like a little bit laid off, and then that club head works around that way. So one thing to note about Freddie's swing, I do think he gets, you'd have to say, a little bit across the line, right, at the top of the backswing there. Another thing that's happening, he does have that pretty flared trail elbow. He's fully turned, right? So that right hip and glute is pushed into that trail side line, and he is starting to drop in a little bit. So he's lower. We can also see, let's get you to the top. Let's get Freddie to the top over here from the face-on view. Yeah. So he's starting to drop in there. The head's lowering, right? And we can see he's getting ready to start moving forward there for sure. Another thing to note, get rid of these arrows over here on the left. Cool. You'd have to argue that's a soft bend to the left elbow, right? That's one thing I think gets overly emphasized. Ooh. Come back here to Freddie. Got rid of the wrong lines again. My apologies. We need his trail side line. We need his shoulder plane. Cool. All right. Now, we can get rid of, my apologies there. Let's just get rid of, oh my goodness. Sorry, gang. You're seeing the human error of me right here. All right. I want to get rid of that circle. Beautiful. Okay. So he's starting to drop in. I do think people kind of criminalize that left elbow bending too much to the top of the backswing. There are great players that have some soft bend to that left elbow. Too much, or lead elbow. Too much is obviously a problem. All right, cool. Let's get Freddie down the line at the top. He's starting to drop in there. Now, we'll get him to position number 5 when his left arm is parallel to the ground. So a lot of golfers kind of recenter a little bit earlier than Fred. Fred gets all the way to the top, and that right hip is still against that like pink line on the trail side. But then a very dynamic move from 4 to 5 where those hips rock from the trail side, bang, all the way to the lead side there. So that left hip and the left knee are out onto that lead side line. Another thing that Fred does, let's get him going here down the line to P5. Boom, right? So he shallows it, right? At P3, that's where, let's get him going here. That's where that shaft was at P3, right? And we'll just trace that all the way down to the ground. And then let's get him going to 5, right? So almost the exact same plane, but shallower. He lays it down, right? Okay, cool. My apologies. That shoulder plane does not want to stay, does it? All right. Let's just get that one more time. Okay, cool. So he stands it up, shallows it down. So big things to note is how dynamically he works forward and how he works that club more vertically in the backswing so he can lay it down more in transition. There's 5. Another thing to note about 5, as I still have him here down the line, although the hips work out in front, that head stays behind ball line, right? Okay, cool. Now we're here to 6. At 6, one thing that I think the vast majority of great players tend to do is they drop that club head behind the hands, right? That circle going there, yeah. Get that club head behind the hands into that position. Another thing we could point out, that leading edge, tiny bit more upright than the spine angle, but certainly not wide open by any means, right? A lot of golfers struggle missing it to the right because that leading edge hangs back that way. So that's slotted. Look how rotated open those hips are at this position. No early extension from Fred, right? We can see here down the line that from the top of the backswing, he drops in and clears that left hip really, really well, right? So we can see that section of his hips behind the line, that section of his head dropped in. Awesome. And then from a face-on view, right, we can see how dynamically he's worked out of that trail side onto the lead side at this point. Belt buckle is over the left foot, right? But the head is over his like right knee. So he has a good amount of that tilt there. And one thing I would note, a lot of golfers want lots of tilt at setup, right? But I'll just use that line there. That's Freddie at setup. And then he moves on to that yellow line with his spine at impact. He has that by P6. We're not at impact yet, but I think we can move to impact from here, right? So Boom, impact. He's got a ton of that tilt, but it was created dynamically. Rory does the same thing. I think power hitters tend to create that reverse tilt of the spine more dynamically than they do at setup, right? And then let me just trace that spine angle. Here's roughly Freddie's spine at impact from a down the line view. Almost mirrors it. Yep, so he's super stable with that spine all the way through. That is beautiful. Now let's move him. Let's get rid of our spine lines there. And let's move him into 8. So impact is 7. 8 is shaft parallel to the ground. Now what's interesting about different golfers, we can see how much Freddie lets those hands kind of pass through right there. So he has you might call it like a handsier release. I love it. We can see how much he rotates that face closed through the ball. So he's a pretty high rated closure there. But P8 and P9 are different depending on the golfer's style, if you will, right? So we can see the shafts parallel to the ground there, and there's his trail right arm. So it speaks to the club head kind of passing around. There are golfers, especially more hitters, kind of hitter style swing, especially with irons. There's times where that right arm and the shaft will arrive parallel to the ground at the same time, right? Okay, cool. So there we are at 8. Let's get us to 8 here from a down the line view. 9, trail arm parallel in the follow through. And we can see how much that club head is turned over to that point. Beautiful. Still in great posture. That spine angle there still has that trail hip pushed into that trail side line. That all looks great. And then I don't think these videos get him all the way into the finish, but Fred has a pretty classic finish there. Let's see how deep this goes. Yeah, so I think most of the great players, they still have some of that tilt, and the club shaft is normally somewhat parallel to the eye and ear line. And then certainly into this position, that's the end of his finish on the face-on view. But we can see that belt buckle completely over the left leg. Head, I think eventually, this isn't totally into 10, that's like 9.5 there. I think into the finish, the head would coast a little bit more through, but it's still behind ball on that point. All right, so there's the swing of the great Fred Couples. Any questions about any of the information that we kind of ran through in this video? That's what the comment section's for. I'm excited to do more and more of these swing analysis videos along with the tips and drills that I already put on the channel. So if you've enjoyed this style content here with the swing analysis, there's definitely going to be more coming. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button on my channel there so you see the next ones come out. That would be a huge help to me. And you have a great day. Thanks for watching.